So when last we met our today's guest, we had a conversation about the fact that he built a really substantial, successful business, and it was kind of moving into, even though he was young for it, into midlife. Like, I built this thing, it was successful, I'm good at it. But what's next? What's passionate? Is it growing this business? Is it starting something completely new? And we talked about the courage it took to stand in the blank space. He had built a team that could run his company, which is a testament in itself, and why we're going to be talking about leadership today. But he also had the courage to say, "I don't know. I'm going to sit in the question for a while. I'm going to travel. I'm going to write. I'm going to get coaching. I'm going to figure out what's next for me." And I got so much feedback on that conversation from people who were terrified, who either lost their jobs and were trying to figure out what was next, or were thinking about jumping off the cliff to do something like that. So having that conversation with Brandon Green was really, really cool. So catching up with him later and with what he's building now is going to be a fascinating conversation. Officially, Brandon Green grew up in Iowa and in 1999 moved to Washington, D.C. with no money, no prospects, no college degree, kind of like me, except I was homeless in 1989 when I came to Washington, D.C. But he did have a knack for sales, just like me, and went into real estate in 2001. Today, he's an award-winning entrepreneur, investor, best known for co-founding Keller Williams Capital Properties, which was named Best Employer by the Washington Post and grew to be among the top 0.2% of brokerage nationwide. In 2022, again, after this hiatus, and we're going to be talking about this, Brandon joined forces with celebrated entrepreneur Shane Feldman, and they launched Alchemy of Money, a tech-enabled financial services company designed to help by real estate entrepreneurs for real estate entrepreneurs. The firm provides bookkeeping, tax strategy, filing, fractional CFO services, financial coaching, and investments to agents and entrepreneurs in the real estate sector. In other words, the skills that they don't have, they have the skills to sell. Now, how do you run a business, which is something I had to learn as a coach. Brandon, thanks for being here.
Mark, thank you for having me. It's fun to be back. Like, woohoo, here we are.
Like five minutes ago, we were having
yeah, it's like,
this conversation,
wow,
right?
what a journey. Woo. Yeah, this is going to be fun. I look forward to reflecting on it.
So let's pick up the story,
Yes.
and we'll put in the show notes that conversation that we had, because it was really powerful. And I did get a lot of messages about what you went through. So you took a break, and you're like,
I
"What's
did.
next?" What was that like?
Yes, it was a break I thought would last a couple of months, and it ended up lasting a couple of years. And I learned a lot in that period of time. I remember I had a coach who was coaching me on my exit who said, it's going to take you a while to pivot. You've got a lot you've got to process and think through. And as a driven person, I was like, what, 2 months, 3 months, maybe 6 months? And he was like, well, probably longer than that. I was like, nah, there's no way. So I remember at one point, about 6 months into that little break, I was in my home office, like working on things, right? And my husband came in and was like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm working on my goals. And he's like, what are these said goals? It's like, I don't know, but I got to have them defined by the end of the quarter. And he's like, oh, really? Why? And I realized in that moment that, oh, wow, I did have a lot of work to do in this gap, in this white space to reset myself and find myself again, because I had really collapsed my entire identity into the business that I had built for, 15 some odd years. So it was a really wonderful time. COVID was in there too. So it was also a good time to not be executing something because everything was so uncertain. And it gave me some real creative energy to get back to my core self. And also to, from a business standpoint, try a bunch of things, and most all of them failed, with the exception of one thing that ended up really taking off.
Well, so what was it like figuring out who you were after 15 years, after some success, some money in the bank, some decade of marriage or so, like, what was that like?
It was frustrating because I felt like I had done so much good work on myself. And then I found myself like, man, what is going on here? Like, I teach this stuff and I can't, So it was frustrating. It was a little embarrassing. It was also humbling to realize how much I had attached my identity to my professional
Mhm.
worth. And then it was also, I was also very grateful that I could zoom out and say, wow, I'm so glad I have the ability to have this gap. I knew I needed to get into something else at some point. So it was more like a sabbatical in some ways. And so the underlying element of how I felt was a lot of gratitude for being able to take the time, and a lot of anxiety too, of not knowing how long it would take. So it was a mixed bag of emotions until things finally started to settle towards the latter half of that break, like the last 6 months. And that's when I was able to exhale, and no surprise, the thing that ultimately took off was created.
I took a break once. I was just like I had just couldn't work anymore. I'd gone from homeless to millionaire. I was successful, and then all of a sudden I couldn't do it anymore. And I took some time off, and it took 3 months for my body to stop vibrating, just
Yes.
just to like stop that buzz that was the adrenaline that was keeping me going.
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
curious. I'm again because I know how driven you are, how purpose driven you are. What practices? What did your coach teach you? What did you bring into your life to help you kind of land into yourself?
So I increased my meditation and my journaling substantially, and use that as an outlet to sort of manage that racing mind that was judging my break, that was trying to accelerate me into the next thing. I remembered, and also I increased my acupuncture. As a matter of fact, during one of my
Mm,
acupuncture appointments, my acupuncturist said, look, you are right now suspended between the past and the future. And in life, we have very few moments in time. Some people have none of these moments where you are not attached to this or that. So she's like, stay suspended as long as you possibly can, because that's where the gold is. And I could sense it, but I was anxious to like land on something. She's like, no, 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 no. Stay up there as long as you can. And so every time I felt an urge to like launch into something, I was like, wait, can I stay suspended a little longer? And ultimately, I think that's what gave me the power and the energy and the focus and the drive and the ambition to like launch the next thing, was I stayed suspended long enough to recharge.
nice. It's so important to have those people around you to hold you as you're going through this change.
Yes.
And it doesn't always have to cost money. You can surround yourself with people who support you, who have your best interests at heart. If you can afford it, it's great to, hire a trainer, hire a coach, hire all that stuff. But if you can't, just surrounding yourself with people who want to grow, who want the best for you, I think is always the best. How
Yes.
did you, how did you know, it sounds like you placed a lot of small bets to see
Yes.
what might be next, to see what would work. How did you know what the next thing to throw yourself into was?
I I I really didn't know, but I knew I was going through two phases. One was an experimentation phase, like throw a bunch of stuff on the wall and see what sticks. And I invested in a variety of businesses. I tried to modify the zoning for a property I own. I did some consulting. Like I did a lot of stuff that did not work out. But I knew that that was a valuable exercise to lead to something that would. And ultimately, one of the things that I did do got some immediate noticeable traction. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That may be a sign that this is something I'm interested in, but also that there's a product market fit for what I'm
Mm.
offering, and people are willing to pay for it and they need it. Wow, that may be a thing. So I just was like literally throwing things in the dark for a couple of years until something was like, oh, traction. And as soon as I sensed there was some traction, I hired a chief of staff, because I knew that my visionary mentality could only take something so far, that eventually I needed to get an operator to lock it down and see if we could grow it.
So now you
And
said chief
so,
of staff, not rather than COO or president.
yeah,
So
I
you
didn't
said,
do COO. He later became my COO of the company, but I started with chief of staff because I wasn't sure if this thing that I had launched was actually going to go anywhere. And I still had like four things rolling. So I brought him in. I was like, I have four things happening here. Right. And so, you know, what do I, what can we get real traction on? And so he was like, well, let me see. So I brought in that operator mindset to see like what exactly can we really roll with, and make this launch forward. So that was a critical element, was going from ideas and vision to real hardcore execution.
It's so interesting because when I look at Alchemy of Money and I look at your biography, one of my favorite things about you, because again, someone meets me and they're like, "Oh, you were just born this guy," and they don't know what it took to become Mark J. Silverman, coach, grounded and centered guy, right? For you, like you actually had some financial challenges. You had some success, and you didn't really know how to manage your money and your taxes and that kind of stuff in about 2009 or something. You talked
Yes.
about that, right? So you're actually found a niche in the market helping an older version of you, a younger version of you, rather.
Yes, I see now, and I read it somewhere along the way, but I had forgotten it, which is if you can find a way to like codify the thing that was the biggest struggle for you and help other people with that, that is magical. It may or may not be a business, but it certainly is magical in the world. And so, yeah, now I've launched Alchemy and Money, and we're helping people with their finances, which is a big, ironic part of my journey because for many years I struggled with my finances. But that is the core of the magic sauce here at Alchemy is empathy. Like we get it. There's no judgment here. Like everything I've seen other people deal with, I've dealt with. So it's really helped grow the business. So, it's good for the world, it's good for business. Like that's great.
It's funny because only tens was about being able to manage your life and manage your time with ADHD, and it was a huge success. But then I saw all these books that were written that are better than my book about time management. They're great. And every single time I saw an interview with the people who wrote those books, it was the people who wrote those books didn't need those books,
Right.
right? They were already organized people that were just teaching them other people. You actually taught people how you became someone who's conscious about money, smart about money, and that
Yes.
kind of thing. So that empathy is, I'm absolutely sure why it's skyrocketing.
Yes. Yeah. That has been really the key to it all. And that's part of our content. It's part of our ethos in the company. And so that's, and seeing all those things align, I was like, oh, this could very well be the next thing. Now, can we get customers to pay for it? Can we get them to pay enough that we can have a margin? Can we hire the proper talent? What's the technology? Like there was all those things too that then needed to roll forward in the months thereafter.
And again, you didn't take yourself out of the business that you were in and go to a completely different place. You went adjacent to some place that found a new place. So you already had an audience. You already had
Mhm.
connections. You already, so you had fertile ground to try this out.
Yeah, I looked across the US. I was like, I have all these relationships in real estate. I mean, it would kind of be smart to do something that those folks could participate in, right? So I think now that I look back on it, that's been another component to the rapid growth is I already have the credibility in the space that I earned over 15, 20 years and was able to, like you said, pivot that and move into a different vertical, but within the same industry. So I think that was, kind of smart actually, and I don't take full credit for it. I had another coach who was helping me sort through a myriad of ideas, and he was like, "Shouldn't you do something related to real estate?" I'm like, "Ah, no, I'm done with that." He's like, "Well, there's a lot in there. You may wanna." And
Right.
ultimately, I was like, "Yeah, no, no, you're right. I should try to do something there. That's going to make a lot of sense."
It makes a lot of sense. When I first became a coach, I didn't want to be a an executive coach because I didn't want to go back into the pool that I came from. I was
Mm,
terrified to go back as this kind of weird coachy person, and that's how I make my bread and butter. Once I accepted that, that's when my business took off. So it's really interesting to stay adjacent. So now, again, we're talking an evolution, a
yes,
maturity. You built
yes.
a team, you built a business and you did a great job, and you made the mistakes and you learned things. Now you're building a new team. You started with a chief of staff, which I think is brilliant. What did you learn that you brought into this new venture and how you're building this team?
So there's a couple big differentiators in this next venture. The first one is I don't actually deliver the product, meaning I'm not actually doing your tax returns. I'm not actually doing your books.
Thank God, right?
I think, yeah. So, and that there's, two things on that. One is I'm not trained to do that, and that's not my thing. But the other thing that it's really helped me realize is how powerful it is to have someone growing the company who's not actually producing the product every day.
Mhm.
That has allowed us to really accelerate quickly. So it made me really think about, okay, that's a great strategic advantage. What can we do to use that to grow faster? So I think the power of, if you can do it, get into a position where you're not the one delivering the product. Now, I'm talking with customers all day long, right? I'm still very much in sales and in service and in vision, but not actually sitting down and doing the tax returns has really helped.
Nice.
I think the other one, Mark, I wanted to mention today, I was thinking about this earlier, is speed to decision is so much better this time. So because of what I was doing before, I now can see patterns with my team and with the business. And having the experience in the past gives me the confidence to make a rapid decision to pivot right, left, up, down, move, right? We have a team member right now that we were looking at, we're like, something, it just isn't quite like clicking just right. Right. So I was like, all right, let's address that now. We're not going to wait for like 6 months and see how this pans out. Like, no. I know, like, we need to let's do something here along the edges. So the speed to decision, even though that doesn't mean all these decisions are right, but the speed to take action and actually to make decisions the second time around is noticeably different. And that, I think, has really helped us execute and grow faster.
How about your tolerance for making mistakes?
I have a higher tolerance, a much higher tolerance. I think the first time around, it felt like a lot of mistakes were existential, but now that I look at it, I'm like, very few mistakes are actually existential. And so I've given my team a lot more rope than I would have in my previous venture as I was growing it. And I also hired people from day one with the mindset to scale. So
Mm,
one of the challenges I remember facing before is every time we would hit another milestone of growth, I was like, I need a whole new team
mm.
because I hired people to do today's work, not tomorrow's. And so I didn't get much runway and that was a real painful challenge because very few people were in a position to grow at the pace that the company was
And
growing.
you were
So,
probably surprised at your growth,
for sure.
each time. And now it's like, oh, I know how to do this. Let's look 5 years in the future.
Correct. If I can't see a path to this individual growing with the company over 5 years based on our pre-articulated growth strategy, then we're not going to hire them. So it's a very different mentality around talent and saying, no, we got to leverage. I'll give you some specific examples. So we're not hiring anybody who is not extremely technically oriented. We're not a tech company, but we're tech enabled, and tech and data is a huge part of what we're doing. So if you cannot, do a lot with technology, you're not a good fit for the team, right? Because we know where we're headed, right? So those hiring decisions based on an articulated vision, um, and knowing that we're going to really grow has changed how I've been thinking about talent to make sure that we're putting people in a position to be able to succeed, not just today, but also tomorrow.
Nice. What are you doing about investment? What are you thinking about for investment for your people? And if you want them to grow with your company, since they're going to be with your company, you're going to have to help them with that. What kind of investments do you plan on making?
Yeah, so we from day one set out personal and professional development plans for everybody. And also, what's been interesting about this is the investment professionally we've had to make in people hasn't been necessarily technical skills. They're coming to the table with that. It's been about learning about the real estate industry at the level I know it so that they have the empathy that they need, that I have naturally, to work with our members. So that from a professional standpoint has been interesting. Like, how do we expose people more to the real estate agent so they understand the day-to-day of that? And then on the personal side, right, it luckily our team is very coachable and very interested in personal development. And I really think your business grows to the extent you do and your
Mhm.
people do personally. So that's been a really big orientation from day one.
Nice. I love listening to you because I remember in our first conversation, you talking about how you didn't understand how you came across to people, and you rubbed people the wrong way, and you were not only you were I focused, and then you learned to be we focused, and then you learned to be they focused. I still remember that conversation. And everything that you're talking about is how am I going to build this team for them, and then in extension for the customers, for the clients,
Yes.
uh,
And
uh, which I think is a recipe for exponential growth.
I've been thinking too a lot, Mark, this time around of keeping my direct report to very small.
Mm.
So the first company I built, I don't know, at some point I had 15 direct, 20 direct, I don't know, so many people. I was like, in the center of all these. I was like, that was stressful for them. For me, it really stalled our growth. So this time I'm like, no, I get to pick at most six over the life cycle of the company. So, who is it going to be those people? So the very first person I picked, my chief of staff, who became my COO, I was like, the whole company operationally has to build under you. I'm not going to hire anybody else. You have to hire everybody else.
Nice.
Okay. So even still today, he is my direct report, and I've got sort of a dotted line report to the finance team. But I've been really thoughtful about, like, I got to save these few seats around me because there's so few of them. So the people that do get a seat next to me need to have monster capacity of their own to be able to build out a large org chart underneath them. So I didn't even think about that the first time around, but this time around, I'm very attuned to that. If you can't grow and develop and manage a lot of people, you can't be in this inner circle.
I interviewed Cameron Harold, who runs the COO Alliance. He wrote a book called Second in Command. Really, really bright guy, and he hammered home his philosophy in keeping your direct reports really small, keeping your dashboard really, really simple, so that
Yes.
what you're looking at, and know where to drill down, but you're not overwhelmed with that information. And his whole philosophy is that, and that's what I hear what you're saying is
Yes.
that's what you're doing this time around.
Big time. It's easy to say, much harder to actually execute, because that means you got to find some real golden ticket people, and there are not that many of them. And getting a data set that accurately measures all the things you need to see within the company takes a lot of work, right? But yeah, it's the complexities in creating the simplicity. But if you do it right, you're
It
right.
takes a
You
lot
can.
of work to be simple.
Yeah, it does. It really does. But if you could get there, then you're like, I only got a couple people, and we only have a couple metrics. And those are the things we pay attention to in almost a monotonous way every single day to get this thing to grow.
Right. All right. So give two pieces of advice to younger Brandon.
Yeah. So the first one, I kind of want to go back to what we're saying about the break. I think that even if you don't position yourself to take a 2-year break, I think it's really powerful to position yourself to take a 2 to 6 month break every 5 years. So we often like work hard for either these big exits or these big results or these big retirement packages or whatever, right? I actually think it's a little more practical and useful to think about working in 5-year increments
Mm.
and to take substantial time off in those 5-year increments. So that's one thought for younger Brandon or anybody who's working on their business or working generally. Like, maybe you don't need to think about, or maybe you'll never get this big and miraculous exit. But most of us, if we have a little bit of discipline around saving and investing, should certainly be able to create a 6 month period of time where you can take time and recharge and regroup. So that's my first point is, work towards the ability to do that. And that can be a really powerful way for you to reset and then to continue to grow.
What's
Number two. So number two is about thinking of relationships in the context of your entire career and how to thread and weave those through. So it's almost cliche to say it's all about relationships, right? But as you get further into your career, you realize, oh no, actually it is. The tricky part, though, is how do you maintain and curate those relationships over, you know, decades? It's one thing to do that with a subset of 100 people or maybe 200 people. But when you get into 20, 10, 20, 30 years, you have hundreds of people. So what do you do? A, a really good advisor taught me early on. He said, great relationship building is about formal and informal touch points.
mm,
So on the formal side, everybody who is in a professional capacity needs to have some form of a database of the people that are in their life And from a personal brand standpoint, need to be sending out something to all those people so that they're hearing from you in some manner forever. Because those relationships are going to come to fruition somehow down the road and you're never even going to know about it. That's sort of the formal, systematic approach to it. Then the informal is acknowledging that let's call it 1,000 people. There's going to be a subset of 50 to 150 that are going to ebb and flow out of importance in your life as your career progresses. That's 100% okay. You need to identify that 50 to 150 at any given time and spend a lot more time with them, happy hours, going to dinners, going on walks on a Saturday. I think what people miss is they think I've got to maintain relationships with 1,000 people. Not true. Or they don't realize that that group of 150 to 50 to 150 is actually going to change almost in this increment of 5 years I'm talking about. Like the people I'm spending the most time now today with, for the most part, are very different than the people I
Mhm.
spent time with 5 years ago. And that's okay. So if you think of your relationships like that, and then zoom back out over the context of 10, 20, 30 years, you can have a quite a database of folks that know and love you, that you have given enormous value to over the years, that you've even forgotten about, that when something that you need something, they're there for you, and then magic happens. So I feel really excited that I have that perspective now of more time in the business, and I can see how critical those relationships have been in launching this next venture and supporting me and getting me down the road after my break.
It's really incredible. Actually interviewed a guy yesterday who's now VP of sales of a company, and when he started, he was 24 years old, and he had the same job I did, even though I was much older than he did. And he was just a snot nosed, kind of arrogant kid. And I watched him grow to be me oriented, we oriented, they oriented, as you say, and become this just beautiful human being. And when I read his bio, and we actually did it in my studio, and it said 20 years executive experiences. I was like, that time goes by so fast. And if you create those
Yes.
relationships, like you get to have those for the rest of your life. It's amazing.
And if you're no longer 20, like we're not, it still continues, right? I'm looking now, like, look, I'm in my 40s. Like, what am I doing today to curate those relationships so that in my 60s and in my 70s and in my 80s, they're there as my life continues to ebb and flow. So no matter how old you are, and even if you've never even started, I think having that thought about really getting a bit more strategic,
Mm.
and it really just, I think, starts with accumulation of all those relationships in a database, and then looking back and saying, now, how do I engage in those database or in those relationships with that database versus just like scrolling social media and being like, oh, I haven't talked to so and so in a while. Like that, that's probably not going to do it. It's got to be a lot more purposeful and strategic than that.
Nice. So we're going to put everything in the show notes. But Brandon, you share so much wisdom on LinkedIn and on social media. If people want to find you, where can they find you?
So most of my handles are Brandon Green now on social media. And if you want to check out what we're doing at Alchemy, our website is alchemyofmoney.co. Alchemyofmoney.co. And there's a blog on that site too, my blog, where I get to send out some stuff that I'm thinking about on a weekly basis. So yeah, please take a look at the material we've got.
Really, really interesting stuff. And I'll put all those in the show notes so people can just click on it when they get
Thanks,
home
Mark.
from their car. Brandon, thank you for sharing the journey and your wisdom and being so vulnerable and transparent about what you're doing. It's brilliant.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
To everybody else, this is a journey. Brandon and I have known each other for a few years, and we're watching each other grow. I just said I talked to someone from 25 years ago in my basement. Who would have ever thought that in the future? So your relationships are key. Take good care of yourself. I love you. Thank you for your time and attention. Have a great rest of the day.